Good evening. Happy Wednesday night. Shh. Nice to see you all. Couple of announcements before we get started. Tonight is going to be our closing night of our series, which has been quite extraordinary. If you haven't been here for the last semester, let me suggest to go back into the video library and look at some of the sessions. Last week's session on Israeli literature since 1967, it was pouring rain, so I know some people couldn't get here. It was an extraordinary session, eminently worth watching. Yuval Ran's session on music since 1967, extraordinary session. Steve Popper's session on economics was extraordinary. Some really wonderful, wonderful sessions in our conversation with the Council General. It's been a wonderful semester. I want to say a couple of words of gratitude. A very special word of gratitude to Louise. Where's Louise? Where's Louise? Louise! She's in the other room running around. Louise, thank you so much. Louise Spitzer is our volunteer extraordinaire whose thousands of hours of devotion have made this possible. Thank you so much for your kindness and your care and your devotion and the brownies. They have kept us alive through this journey. Thank you so much. And to Billy Kabacher, our wonderful usher, who has been so careful, thanks so much. Billy, thank you for your kindness. To Jess and Lil Bime, who have not been well enough to be with us, they've had surgeries and other kinds of things, but wonderful people. They're okay, they're fine, they're on the mend, and they're healing. But we have such gratitude to Jess and Lil for their generosity for making the series possible, and to the Schulweis Institute for making the series possible. Our deepest gratitude. And to everyone who participated, Doug was instrumental in helping me set up some of the sessions. Thank you for your help. And to everyone who came and to learn with us, it's really wonderful. So thank you all very, very, very much. A couple of announcements. Next week, you get to keep learning, so keep this on your calendar. Next week, Valley Beth Shalom is going to present, along with the CSUN Jewish Studies Department, the next iteration of the Amato Lecture. And to introduce the lecture, I'd like to welcome Professor Jennifer Thompson of CSUN, who's going to tell us about this year's lecture. Professor Thompson teaches Jewish ethics at Cal State Northridge. It's great to have you here. Thanks so much. Just speak right into the mic.
Right into there. All right. Hi. Thank you for giving me a couple seconds just to tell you about what we have in store for next week. I hope we'll see you all here 7:30 instead of 7 o'clock, but otherwise right in this room 1 week from now. Professor Moses Pava is coming. He's the dean of the business school at Yeshiva University and a professor of accounting, and one of our greatest contemporary thinkers about Jewish business ethics now. He's widely known in both Jewish ethics and business ethics in a secular sense for his work that has gone from the Bernie Madoff scandal to the agri-processor scandal to how to teach business ethics to our youth today. And he's coming to work through some new research that he's doing with us here. He's going to talk about how businesses can contribute to the redemption of the world. And he's going to teach us about that using Midrash. And I'm really excited to have him coming. I've been working with him for about a year to get him to come out here for this. So I hope I will see you all then, and we'll have a robust question and answer discussion after the lecture. So any questions you might have about business ethics are welcome at that point. Thanks so much. See you then.
Thank you, Professor, and wonderful to have you here. We look forward to having everyone back next week to study with Professor Pava and with Professor Thompson. A couple of other quick announcements. This weekend, Valley Beth Shalom is celebrating our cantors. We actually have two of them. Herschel Fox, who is moving from full-time to part-time, and Phil Barron, who is moving from under-cantor to uber-cantor. And we're celebrating them because they're wonderful guys. Now, in the Jewish world, when you want to celebrate a Jew, the way you do it is going and finding a bigger Jew. So if you want to celebrate a cantor, you find a bigger cantor. And the biggest cantor we could find is the great Alberto Mizrahi of Chicago. And he's going to be our scholar in residence this coming Shabbat. Alberto is a marvelous soul, a very, very wonderful scholar of Jewish music, a very enthusiastic advocate for Jewish music, and a great, great, great chazan, a great singer. He's president of the Cantors Assembly. and considered one of the great cantors in the world in our generation. He'll be with us Friday night. There'll be a service beginning at 7:30. 7:30, so come and enjoy a wonderful night of Jewish music celebrating these great cantors. Shabbos morning, we'll have Torah study, we'll have service, there's a bar mitzvah, and then Cantor Mizrahi will be davening the Musaf prayers, also a wonderful treat. And then following that, there'll be lunch. We serve a good kiddush here at VBS, and then you'll have a chance to learn with Cantor Mizrahi in his wonderful role as scholar of Jewish music at a Shabbat Shiur. So please come and join us this weekend. It'll be a very, very special weekend, and everything's free. I mean, it's all free, so come and enjoy this. You can't get a better deal anywhere in the city of Los Angeles. This I guarantee. Next week, the Amato lecture, and then many more things going on in the shul that we hear about, but we'll get to our talk tonight. So please rise from your seats, turn to the folks beside you and say good evening and welcome. Now, put your arms about each other and draw each other close. We say a bracha for the opportunity to learn together. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu mitzvotav etzivanu, la'asok b'divrei Torah. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Please be seated. Tonight's session is devoted to a vision of the future. We have spent a great deal of time looking backward in the past as Israel, watching Israel's development since the war of 1967. Tonight I want to look forward. And tonight, because I want to look forward, I decided to split this session in two. We actually have two sessions tonight for the price of one. In the second hour, we will welcome Rabbi Aaron Lerner of UCLA Hillel, who is a legend in this city because he succeeded Chaim Seidler-Feller, who ran UCLA Hillel since the Bar Kokhba revolt. And if you know Chaim, Chaim's taught here. He's a huge personality. And we said nobody could replace Chaim. In 3 months, Rabbi Lerner replaced Chaim. And he's brought great love and great passion and great vision and great leadership and great effectiveness to this office. So we're delighted to have you here. And in addition, Rabbi Lerner has schlepped along in his backpack the two leaders of Bruins for Israel, the Israel Advocacy Group on the UCLA campus. So in our second hour, after you get brownies and coffee, we're going to sit with Rabbi Lerner and the Bruins for Israel kids and talk about what it means to advocate for Israel on a college campus, what that means for Zionism and Israel in America in the next generation. In the first hour, I want to welcome Dr. Sivan Zakkai. Now, I could tell you that Dr. Sivan Zakkai is an assistant professor of education in the graduate education program at the AJU, and she also has an appointment at Brandeis University, that she's written some books and articles and lots of studies on how you teach Israel to American kids. I could tell you that she has a PhD from Stanford, which must bring her mom great nachas and joy, in modern Jewish history and in teaching and education. I could tell you that she is a recognized scholar of this field, but I'll tell you what the one thing about her which made me invite her here. Sivan Zakkai is the person that every educator in this city calls when they want to figure out, how the heck do I teach Israel to a new generation? When you just get to that point, you say, how do I do it? How do I communicate a love of Israel, a passion for Israel, a sense of Israel to kids who have grown up in America who are now 4th, 5th, 6th generations American? Who do you call? You call Dr. Sivan Zakkai. Who do you call if you want to figure out what Israel's going to be, what Zionism's going to be in the next generation of American Jewish life? You call Sivan Zakkai. Thank you so much for being here. Now, you've got to talk right into that one. If you talk a millimeter away, they will scream at you.
Scream away or raise your hand if at any point you cannot hear me. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and thank you to all of you for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk about this issue of tomorrow's Zionism. Closer. Okay. Then I'm going to take it out and hold it. Okay. So I'm excited to talk to you today about tomorrow's Zionism, but tomorrow's Zionism, if we want to talk about that, then we have to talk about today's youth, because today's youth are tomorrow's Jewish leaders. Usually in the sociology of American Judaism, youth is defined as anyone under the age of 35 years old. So that's a huge range. We're going to make it a little easier for you tonight, and we're going to split it into two groups. Something that's called emerging adulthood, and Rabbi Lerner and his students from UCLA are going to talk to you about what it means to be a Zionist in emerging adulthood, 18 and on. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the folks who are under 18. And of course, I know that that's also a range. And sometimes I'll flit back and forth between talking about the teenagers among that group and talking about the 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8-year-olds in that group. But in order to understand how today's youth, American Jewish youth, think about Israel and think about Zionism, the first thing that you need to know is how today's youth are growing up in an American Jewish community that is vastly, vastly different from the American Jewish community a generation ago, and certainly different than American Judaism when you were children. So there are three things that distinguish between youth, American Jewish youth then and American Jewish youth now. I have some props. I'm going to show them to you. I'm going to put them on the table. I know not everybody will be able to see it from every vantage point. I will talk through them. They're as much as a reminder to me to help tell you about the important things as they are for you. So the first is the defining historical moment through which we have lived. Now, I'm hoping to get 3 people to shout out, just really quickly, the most important historical moment of Israel's existence that you personally have lived through. Six-Day War, 51, 1948, the establishment of the state, 67, Six-Day War, okay. Usually when you get together a group of adults, the dates that they will shout out will vary from moments of triumphant joy, we have a Jewish state, to moments of real sadness, the Yom Kippur War. Yeah. It will go from the Six-Day War to peace agreements with Egypt. If, however, you ask someone under the age of 18, what is the defining historical moment of Israel that you personally have lived through? There is no joy and triumph, and there is no kind of crash. It is instead the following answer: the Second Intifada, the kidnapping of the 3 boys, social protests, you know, occupation, thank you. Exactly, all of these things. And what that means is that instead of being alternating moments of triumph and moments of sadness, American Jewish youth, those under 18, have never lived through a peace process. Oslo died before they were born. They have only lived through moments of conflict, punctuated by moments of greater conflict. That is the defining historical experience in the lifetime of American Jewish youth. The second important shift that you need to know about is the shift from what Ted Sassone calls a mobilization paradigm to a direct engagement paradigm. And That's all fancy words for saying that it used to be, a generation ago, that the American Jewish community was relatively centrist and relatively unified politically. And now, a generation or two later, it is politically partisan and polarized. And I want to just show you quickly what that looks like, and then think with you about why that really matters for American Jewish youth. If you wanted, in your own youth, to plant a tree in Israel, what did you do? Okay. You had a blue box, and this blue box was in every synagogue in America and almost every Jewish classroom in America. And all you had to do was say blue box, and it was code word, and we all knew. You put your money in that blue box, and it goes to a central organization which will, on behalf of the Jewish people, plant trees in Israel. Well, if you want to plant trees in Israel now, you have a very, very different world. Because you can still plant with the JNF. In the shift from mobilization to direct engagement, the old institutions do not disappear. They remain, but they occupy a much, much more crowded field. So JNF still exists, and you can still plant your trees through JNF. But if you are a Jewish youth today, you also can plant your trees through the Jewish Center for Nonviolence. Now, if you plant your trees through the Jewish Center for Nonviolence, then what you are doing is you are going, and my language is going to intentionally shift as with each of these organizations. My guess is, depending on your own politics, some of this language is going to be quite distasteful to you. That's exactly part of the point. Okay, so if you plant through the Jewish Center for Nonviolence, then you are saying that because of the trials of Israeli occupation, the Israeli government, and especially the IDF, has uprooted trees in Palestinian villages, and you as a Jew want to go and replant those trees, specifically in Palestinian neighborhoods whose trees have been uprooted. Or you can plant your trees through Chasdei Me'ir. Chasdei Me'ir works only planting trees in the greater land of Israel, especially in Judea and Samaria, making sure that the settlements get enough money to flourish and bloom. Those are the direct tree planting organizations, but there's also a whole layer of politics around planting trees. So you can also give your tree planting money to Tru'ah. Now, Tru'ah has something called the Where's George campaign, in which they take your dollars and they help pressure JNF and say, JNF, we want you to be really transparent. Where does every dollar go? And please make sure that none of those dollars go to the occupied territories. Or you can give your money to the ZOA, the Zionist Organization of America. And they will also pressure the JNF on your behalf to make sure that your tree planting dollars go only to Jewish and not to Arab communities in the state of Israel. Again, then and now. But it's not just about tree planting. It's also about how we get our information. So, if you think about a generation ago, how did American Jews get their news about Israel? They had a newspaper. Sometimes it was a Jewish newspaper. Sometimes it was the Los Angeles Times. But there were a relatively small number of sources of information, and those sources of information mediated the messages that we were all getting. Now, how do people get their information? Right. So this part should be of no surprise to anybody, right? The only thing that was surprising to me, I run a longitudinal study of American Jewish children. I've been tracing children since they were 5 years old, and I've been watching them grow up. And of course, you know, everybody says, right, kids on these devices these days. But even I was surprised to learn, at what age do kids start getting their news about Israel from this kind of device? And the answer is the day they learn to read. Usually in first grade, for sure by second grade. And here's how it works. It's not intentional. No educator or parent does it on purpose, but the parent has out the phone. I'm sure you've all seen this, right? And the parent is scrolling through a screen. Maybe it's Facebook, maybe it's CNN Online, who knows what it is. Well, the kid wants the parent's attention and wants to know, what is that little screen vying for my attention? And so the kid goes and looks over the shoulder of the parent, and as soon as the kid learns to read, the kid is now reading headlines of news from Israel, so long as the parent has headlines from Israel on their phone. Well, you put all of this together, and it means that children are incredibly savvy, and they understand things, including news from Israel, at a younger age than ever before. They understand and tell me stories in explicit, often graphic detail about violence in Israel as early as 7 and 8 years old. And then this thing that we often think of as a teenage problem, the angst that American Jews feel towards Israel, right? Yes, I'm proud, but I'm also maybe embarrassed, and I'm worried, and I'm happy, and I'm all those mixture of feelings, right? We might think of this as a teenage problem, but actually, this happens by the age of 8 or 9 years old for American Jews today. 8 or 9 years old. There is no single unified path. There are, in fact, multiple Zionisms, and often they are competing with one another. There is no unified voice. The Jewish people does not speak collectively. And the kids are getting a series of messages and getting a chance to decide among them. And that means that everything is political. Even the things that we don't think of as political, like learning about arts and culture, even those are political. So this is the changing landscape. This is the world within which we live. And I know some people think this is an exciting change, and I know that some people think this is a horrifying change. For today, I don't want to talk to you about whether this is a good change or a bad change, but about what we as a collective Jewish community need to do in order to respond to this new reality. Because this is the reality in which Jewish youth are growing up today. And I want to talk to you about 4 paradigm shifts that we as a collective Jewish people need to make in order to teach contemporary American Jewish youth about Israel and about Zionism. So the first paradigm shift is from thinking about Israel as a formal educational endeavor to thinking about Israel as part of the fabric of daily Jewish living. And this means that we need to shift from thinking it's the rabbi's job, or it's the teacher's job, or it's the Jewish professional's job to teach youth about Israel. And I, as a community member, or as a parent, or as a grandparent, I don't need to do it because the professionals will do it, to understanding that it's actually all our jobs and that it happens not only in the synagogue, but in the larger community and especially in the home. Why? Well, research has shown, and this is very, very tragic news when I talk to groups of Jewish educators, and to those of you who are rabbis in the room will also probably find this a little bit gut-wrenching. Research has shown that contemporary Jewish youth, and especially teenagers, the people that they trust least to teach them about Israel are the Jewish communal professionals whose job it is to teach them about Israel. They don't trust their teachers, they don't trust their rabbis. And the reason they don't trust their teachers and their rabbis even if they would trust them for other Jewish things, just not Israel. The reason they don't trust their teachers and their rabbis is because they see their teachers and their rabbis as giving a sanctioned party line. And they are not interested. Remember, these are very, very savvy kids from a very young age, and they're not interested in a party line. So the bad news is you can't rely on the professionals, and you can't rely on the rabbis and the teachers, but the good news is all of you sitting here today. Because kids do trust, shockingly, their family. Right? They might not trust their parents or their grandparents about other things, but about Israel, they do trust their parents and their grandparents, and they trust their peers. And that means that as a member of the Jewish community, you can do some things to help this situation. You can amplify the voices of peers who have positive and meaningful relationships to Israel, because when kids learn with their peers rub off on them. And when there are Jewish youth in your own life, you can talk about your own relationship with Israel. But here's the catch. You cannot do it as a representative of the Jewish people. You can only do it as an individual member of the Jewish people. Not as a representative, just as a member. Because kids want to talk to people, not to party lines. The other thing that I want you to know before I move on to the second paradigm shift is we know that there's a special place in this shift for Jewish grandparents, and that role is especially outsized for grandparents who have grandchildren with only one Jewish parent. In general, grandparents have a positive socialization role on their grandchildren's conceptions of Judaism and Israel, but it is especially true when the grandparents' children themselves have intermarried, and then the grandchildren have one Jewish parent. They turn especially to the Jewish grandparents in their lives for having meaningful conversations about Judaism. So the first paradigm shift is from thinking about teaching youth about Israel as something that the professionals do, to understanding that actually it's something that we all have a part in doing, especially since the youth might not trust the professionals. The second shift, and this one's a little bit harder, is shifting from shielding kids to helping them navigate the world. Well, why? Why can't we just shield our kids? There's bad stuff in the world. There's bad news about Israel all the time. You need to assume an early exposure to negative or violent or troubling news about Israel. You need to assume that today's youth are politically savvy and digitally connected by the age of 7. And that means that kids know about things like terrorism, and they know about things like anti-Semitism, and they know about all these things that adults like to whisper about in the company of children, and they know it from a very early age. If you wait until high school or college to talk about it, you have already missed the boat. So you have two choices, given this digitally connected world in which kids exist. One is you can try and reduce their exposure. The problem with that is it's a losing battle. Because even if you limit their exposure to this, all they have to do is go down the road to the California Pizza Kitchen and have dinner with their families, and the screen is on in the background while they're eating. It is a losing battle to try and limit their exposure. But that is one option. The other option is to help children understand and deal with that exposure. So last year I was working with a large group of educators from around the world. And a teacher stood up and she said, well, I just want to be really clear that we don't let kids talk about that in our school. And by that she meant terrorism, anti-Semitism, occupation, any of these things that make people uncomfortable. We want to make sure, she said, that our school is a safe space for children and that they don't have to worry about it here. And I asked her, well, how's that going for you? What happened? And she said, well, they're not talking about it in the classrooms. That's good. They're only talking about it in whispered voices on the playground. Well, what that means is that there are really only two things that can happen if you don't let children talk about these kind of uncomfortable things. Either they will go and they will talk about it only with their peers in hushed voices on the playground. And the problem with that is that when kids only talk with their peers, they get misinformation and there's no adult to help correct them, to help steer them back on course when they get off course. Or they can talk about it with non-Jewish adults, with their public school teachers, with their soccer coaches, with their homework tutors. The assumption that they won't talk about it at all is a misguided one. They'll just find somewhere else to talk about it. And that means that the Jewish community is much better off being the place where we say to kids, come, we can talk about that here. We can talk about anti-Semitism. Now, that doesn't mean we need to scare kids. It doesn't mean we need to put ideas in their heads if they're not already there. But good chances are pretty good that they are already wondering and thinking about questions that have to do with global terrorism and anti-Semitism. And we can be the place in the Jewish community to let our youth think about and talk about and question it. And this means a really big shift from thinking about the purpose of talking about Israel with youth as one of instilling Zionism in them to one of helping children make sense of the world in a Jewish way. It used to be that we would give an analogy of an inoculation, a vaccine. If only we do good Israel education when they are youth, they will be inoculated against anti-Zionism when they get to campus, anti-Semitism, all sorts of bad things that other people say about the state of Israel. But I want to urge you to think about it not like a vaccine, but more like helping youth make healthy eating decisions. First of all, it's not something done to them. It's something they actively have to do, and they often need guidance in making their own decisions. And it is something they can do for the rest of their lives. It's not a one-time thing. Once you made one healthy decision about eating, it might set you up for making more, but it doesn't guarantee. It's not enough if we do it once. It is an ongoing process of helping kids make good decisions in the world, and we as the adults in their lives are there to guide them through it because we know we won't always be around. And we want them to be able to continue to make healthy and good decisions when we're not around. In this vision, it's the job of adults to help kids navigate the world, not to shield them or protect them or pad them from the world. That's shift number 2. Shift number 3 is linked to number 2, and that is shifting from preparing adults in training to teaching children. Many adults assume that talking about Israel is all about preparation for later, and especially for BDS on campus. And Aaron and his students will talk to us about that reality. But we need to turn to educational philosopher John Dewey, who says, and I'm paraphrasing here, childhood is not just preparation for life. For a child, childhood is life. Childhood is not just about preparing Jewish children for later when they get to college campus. It has to be about helping them build meaningful relationships with Israel now. And that can help when they get to college, that can help them later, But the purpose isn't college. The purpose is meaningful Jewish living now, and in college, and after college. There is a school I know of that had a major donor in the community who gave a lot of money to the school for the purposes of training foot soldiers in the campus Zionist army. And when the middle schoolers at this school heard this, they said, I'm out. I don't want to talk about Israel at school. I don't want to talk about Israel in my Jewish community, because I do not want to be a foot soldier in somebody else's army. I just want to be a kid. As a kid, I'm happy to learn stuff, but let me be a kid. And the surprising thing about kids is that sometimes what they're capable of is remarkably, amazingly sophisticated things. And sometimes what they're capable of is not what we expect them to be capable of. So for example, young kids starting at birth can start learning Hebrew language and culture. The earlier you get them, the better it will be for their language abilities and for the culture that goes with that language. Sometimes adults think like, they can't do a second language, they're too little. But actually, no, the littler you are, the easier it is, right? Then, after we do language and culture, we can get to history. And only later, when they're much, much bigger, like solidly in later elementary school or middle school, can we do things like geography. Except if you go into most Jewish classrooms, preschool and early childhood and elementary classrooms, what do? They visit Jerusalem and then they visit Tel Aviv. They focus on geography, but geography is actually the hardest concept for kids to get, and that needs to come much later. But it is through this learning, culture and language, and then history, and then geography, that Jewish youth will develop meaningful relationships with Israel and Zionism. But here's the catch. They get to be the ones to determine what is meaningful to them. We, as the adults in their lives, can help them learn, but they get to choose their own passions and their own paths in life. The fourth and final shift I want to talk to you about today is a shift from youth advocacy to civic participation and civil discourse. We need to have a shift because helping youth become Israel advocates is not good enough. We need to help them become civically engaged participants in American and Jewish political life. Okay, so what's the difference? Both of these have to do with being politically engaged. Both have to do with thinking about the Jewish community and its role in the larger society. But civically minded people work together to create the kinds of communities that they want to create. And advocacy is only one of many tools of civic participation. Another really important tool that we don't give nearly enough time or energy focused on is the ability to participate in civil discourse across disagreement. Again, remember, this is what the world looks like now. This is what the Jewish world looks like. We have a lot of different options, and we don't all agree as Jews. And learning to exist civilly in the midst of that disagreement is really, really important. I just came back from the National Conference of all Jewish day school educators in the United States. And there I've been collecting stories, and I heard a story, but it is a story that I have heard many, many times before. There was a Jewish school. This one happened to be in New York, but it didn't have to be. I've heard it in many other states as well. And this Jewish school hired a new teacher to teach about Israel. And everybody was really excited about this new teacher until a parent went online and Googled the teacher and found out about the teacher's politics. Well, as soon as the parent did that, the parent called the school and said, this person cannot be part of our school. This person cannot be part of our Jewish community. This person's politics are abhorrent. And in left-leaning cities, it's usually people on the right who are seen as abhorrent. And in right-leaning cities, it's usually people on the left who are seen as abhorrent. And the school, a bunch of families started a campaign to get this teacher ousted. And they did so successfully. The teacher, before the school year ever started, was not allowed to come to school. And then there was a rift in the school community where a faction of parents and community members said, hooray, of course this person shouldn't be teaching our children. And the other half of the community said, how horrible. This person was an educator, a Jewish educator, and should have had a chance with our children. And by the way, my own politics are not that different from his. It's not just about the classroom, though, because what happened in this school community, I heard from one of the parents at the school, is that people stopped inviting each other to Shabbat dinner because they did not know in advance who they were going to invite. Are you going to be on my camp or in the other camp? And we don't want to get into it. So instead, we'll just stay home and have Shabbat all by ourselves. If we do not want to tear our Jewish community apart in this increasingly partisan and increasingly polarized reality, then we need to shift at least some of our communal and educational resources from the outward work of advocacy towards the inward work of teaching civil discourse. And this means that communities need to work together to create, creating's the easy part, and enforce, that's the much harder part, to create and enforce norms for civil discourse that allow two things. One, they have to allow people to passionately express themselves. Civil discourse is not about silencing people. It is about giving them room to say, this is what I believe with all of my heart. And I want to express that. That is my Jewish life. That is my Jewish path. And at the same time, to be able to engage with members of the community with whom I passionately disagree. Finding the right balance between passion and civility can make all of the difference between whether a child or a teen decides to opt into or out of Jewish communal life. And the stakes aren't just about Israel. We know that kids, especially young teenagers, who decide that their Jewish communities are not places where they feel comfortable engaging in civil discourse, shut out not just from Israel, but from Jewish life. And that is a tragedy I don't think any of us want to see. So in a minute, I'm going to hand it over to you, Rabbi. But just kind of to bring it all together, what I'm suggesting is, given this new reality, which does not look like the Judaism of your own childhoods, we need to have a bunch of shifts. We need to move from talking about Israel as the rabbi's job and the teacher's job and the synagogue's job to being the job of all of us. And we need to do that with careful listening and serious expression of our own selves. We need to help children navigate the world in which they live, as messy and scary and unpleasant sometimes as that is. And that means letting kids talk about what they want to talk about, even if that's hard for us as adults. And it means also letting them be kids. We don't have to always worry all the time about what's going to happen when they grow up. We can think about it, but that can't be our only guiding force. We have to think about creating meaningful Jewish experiences for them now when they are young. And we need to make room for civic participation and civil discourse as part of the fabric of Jewish communal life.
So I want to ask a question, and before we conclude this part and take our break, I want to ask you a question, okay? Yeah. By way of our own story, all right? True story. 2 years ago, Yom Ha'atzmaut was coming, and the 6th graders in our day school had a project. They were going to make a map of Israel out of cookie dough and then bake it, and then as part of the celebration, everyone got to eat the map. Pretty cute, right? Adorable project, right? Giant cookie dough map, big enough for the whole school. Every kid will get a chunk of Israel. I was hoping for Beersheba, but you know what it is, right? The educators call me in a panic. And exactly right. Do we put in the West Bank in the same color as the rest of Israel? Do we demarcate a green line and do the West Bank in, like, you know, chocolate as opposed to chocolate chip or cooked? What do you do with? And they said, Rabbi, the problem is that if we do the West Bank in the same color as the rest of the cookie, then there'll be parents who say, don't you know that the occupation is destroying Israel? Is this what you're teaching our kids? And if you do the West Bank in a different color, you'll get parents who say, why are you imposing your left-wing politics on our children? This is not right. The question is, has the division become so acute that it's almost impossible even to teach it?
I'm a teacher at heart, so I do not believe that anything is impossible to teach. No. But cookie maps are a big problem. Because cookie maps do not let us do what good teaching would want us to do with maps, which is to layer them. The Association of Reform Zionists of America is just about to put out a series of educational maps that don't yet exist, but that is what teachers have been hungry for a long time, which is maps that do both, where we can say, look at this version. Some Jews believe that this is what the map should be. Here's who those Jews are, and here's why they think the map should look like this. Peel back the next layer, and here's a different version of the map. And some Jews think that the map should look like this. And here's who those people are, and here's their most compelling vision of why it should look like this. And layers upon layers. We can't do that with cookie maps, but we can do that with digital technology. And so, no, it's not helpless at all. But there is a lot that communities can do before kids ever get into a classroom to make that learning possible. And the most important thing in my mind is this thing called civil discourse. My colleague Lauren Applebaum and I have created something called the ABCDs of communal discourse, which when we go into communities, we ask the communities to agree to these norms before we even work with the teachers and before the teachers even work with the kids. The A stands for admirable intentions. We have to assume, and these are all innocent until proven guilty, we have to assume that when people come into a Jewish communal space like this, they have the Jewish community's best intentions at heart. Now, we might passionately disagree about what that should look like, but we assume, I don't even know you, and I assume that you believe in the good of the Jewish people, and I hope that you will assume that about me. The D, A and D go together. D is difference. I assume that we in this room do not all see eye to eye. And even if we see eye to eye on some things, maybe we see eye to eye, for example, on how the Jewish state should treat the conservative movement. Maybe. Maybe not, though. But I would, for sure, even if we did agree on that, there are certainly other things about Israel politics that we don't agree on. And we have to assume that from the get-go when we go into a room. The B and the A and the D apply to everybody in the community, to parents, to grandparents, to funders, to board members, to everybody in the community. We have to assume that we all have good intentions, and we have to assume that we are different. The B and the C go together, and they apply primarily to the professional staff. The B means betterment. Professional staff is working for their own professional betterment and for the betterment of the institution, and sometimes they will make a mistake, and sometimes they will slip, but they are working to make things better here. And C is competent. They are competent professionals, even when they make a slip. And that sometimes saying, I don't know the answer to that, or I think I made an error there, is part of competence, not incompetence. That's part of how people learn. And if we can put those kinds of norms together for the adults, then it's actually not that hard to teach the kids about the map of Israel, because in your example, it's not the kids that were worried about not being able to handle the map, it's the parents.
Ice cream. I want to thank Dr. Sivan Zakkai. Thank you so very, very much. We are going to take a literally 5-minute break. So the world may have all sorts of difficulties, and you may have all sorts of issues with politics, philosophy, the moral state of America, but at least the brownies are better than they were. Hi, thank you. Hi, come on in. Hi, Baruch haba. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming. We good? Well, good evening, everyone. Part 2 of Tomorrow's Zionism. And I'm very pleased to introduce, once again, we want to welcome back Dr. Sivan Zakkai, and thank you for your wonderful presentation. And I want to welcome Rabbi Aaron Lerner, who is the director of UCLA Hillel, one of the biggest, most active Hillels in the country, and certainly one of the most active and important Jewish institutions in the city. And I'm going to ask Aaron if you would please introduce our student guest tonight.
So thank you so much for having us. I made a decision a few years ago. I've been on campus now for 5 years. I've been doing public forums about Israel, BDS, advocacy, education for the past 4.5 years. And after my first one, I realized that if I don't do it with students, then people don't necessarily, Sivan, believe what the professional says, right? So I'm here tonight with Liav Nagola and Yael Zokin. And then the second reason that I always want students with us is that actually we're an inverted organization. So students actually lead Hillel, and all of Hillel's staff serves to support where students are and the kinds of activities that they want to be involved in. Both Liav and Yael are Israeli Americans and involved in Bruins for Israel. And I will give both of them the mic for just a moment to tell you a little bit about their advocacy and educational experiences there.
Shalom, everyone. So, like Aaron said, my name is Liav. I guess I can start just telling you a little bit about my background first. So, I come from San Diego. Both of my parents are Israeli, like you mentioned, and I, grew up in a very Israeli-American household. And I'm currently a third year at UCLA. I'm vice president of Bruins for Israel. And I've gone through a sort of very interesting journey at UCLA. When I first arrived at UCLA, there was this, I had never even really talked about Israel as like anything other than just who I was and where I come from. I even showed up to UCLA for Bruin Day, like before it started, with a shirt that says Israel is real on it, and I didn't even realize that was like any type of statement. And, as my first year went by and like I started assimilating into UCLA's culture and the Jewish community, I sort of started to try to find myself and find where I fit in with all of these things. And the Jewish community, my freshman year and sophomore year, like it was very much so I was trying to combat whatever anti-Israel things were appearing on campus. And, I went on a trip recently over winter break that UCLA's Hillel started a few years ago. Some students started it called Fact Finders, which is an incredible trip. And the trip itself takes we went 5 Jewish students and 17 non-Jewish students, and we went and explored the complexities of the conflict, and explored really like who these people are and what it means, and sort of came back with a very unique perspective, I think, because I went there, and what was interesting was, of the Jewish students on the trip, I was the only one that didn't always feel the need to defend Israel at every step of the way. And thinking about that, I sort of took a step back and spoke with our Israel fellow when I got back, Lipaz, and I sort of came to the conclusion that I'd never really felt this need of defense, because I know I'm Israeli, I know I'm Jewish, I know where I come from, and I'm very comfortable with that. But coming to UCLA and like being faced with this pressure of needing to always feel like you have to defend, I sort of just jumped on that bandwagon. And after I went on this trip and came back, I now realized that I don't feel that need to defend it, because I'm very comfortable with who I am, and I don't feel like while I'm very much advocating for Israel, I don't feel like I ever need to fight people about it. I'm more so about having an open dialogue and being and feeling comfortable enough with the people around you to take a step back and say, this is where my family comes from. I know their beliefs. I don't agree with everything that they say. These are my beliefs. I don't even know what my opinions are really, but it doesn't matter, because we want to have a comfortable place where we, as the Jewish community and as the people who are part of the Israel community, want to feel comfortable sharing with each other. And that's sort of the way I've evolved at UCLA to this point.
Hi, my name's Yael. I'm also a third year. I'm a pre-med psychobiology major. I'm from Northern California, Marin County. It's 20 minutes north of San Francisco. I went to Jewish day school for 9 years. I went to kindergarten for 2 years, was very good at it. And then went to public high school. And then growing up, my mom always told me, like, you're gonna take a gap year in Israel, like this is you have no choice, like you're going to do this. All my cousins did. They're religious, so they went to seminaries and yeshivas. I'm clearly not, but I went to a Young Judea Year course, and that's, I guess, where like my deep passion for Israel began. I also am a Ramonic. I know VBS is very involved with Ramah. I went there every summer. Except for one summer I was very sick. That inspired me to be a doctor, side note. But I went to Ramah seminar, went to Israel with my 8th grade class. But during my year in Israel, Israel was no longer a place that I visited. It became my home. So I worked on the ambulances there. I've given CPR, treated Holocaust survivors, and I knew after coming back from my gap year in Israel that the connection I had with Israel was forever changed. This light was ignited in me that will just never go out. So came to UCLA. I actually got into UCLA the year before, like a year before leaving on my gap year. My parents were smart and knew I would come back for UCLA, but if nothing was waiting for me, I probably would have stayed in Israel. So I guess now, fast forward, I'm a third year. I've been to Israel 8 times. Since my gap year, I've been back 4 times. My sister just came back from her gap year. I've been on ZOA, Hartman Institute, and a few other programs there. I'm politically active at UCLA on Bruins for Israel. I made a promise to myself that until I make Aliyah, I have to go back every single year to remind myself my love for the country. And I walk around as an Israel advocate with pride. I wear like an Israel pendant on my neck, but yeah, that's me in Israel.
Thank you. Thank you both. The image of UCLA that we get from reading the press is that it's very dangerous to be an Israel advocate on the UCLA campus, that there is a tremendous amount of Palestinian activism, that Israeli advocates are voted down, shouted down, screamed at, harassed, pushed down, anti-Semitized down, that it's really hard to be openly, visibly out of the closet pro-Israel on campus. Is that true? And number one, and number two, what is the nature of being a pro-Israel activist on campus? And what do you do with the opposition that you meet?
So I walk around with pride. There's not one day or second where I blink an eye. Do I wear this Hebrew shirt or do I wear Israel? I'll like go on campus and scout the Jews and be like, hey, like, what's up? Or just engage anyone. But basically, I'm proud to be Jewish and an Israel advocate on campus. That's why I chose UCLA. I was blown away by the community the second I stepped foot onto the campus during my sophomore year of high school. It's the issues I face as a student is what Shabbat to go to. Do I go to Hillel? Do I go to Chabad? Do I go to JAM? And there's multiple Israel organizations on campus. As far as SJP, there is one. Sorry, Students in Justice for Palestine. So they're the pro-Palestinian, I don't like using those words, but they support Palestine. And my first year at UCLA, I cried when I saw the wall. But my second year, the apartheid wall that is put up by SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, which mimics the apartheid wall that was put up in South Africa, so there's the wall, the separation barrier between Israel and the West Bank, and they're mimicking that wall and kind of paralleling it to apartheid. And then they have lots of false claims that are written on the wall. One that stuck out to me is that there's like segregated buses between Israelis and the Arab people. When I saw this wall, it was really hard for me in my first year. My second year, I decided to go up and engage with those at the wall. And I made a friend in SJP. He and I got lunch. We still speak to this day. And this year, I did the same thing. I went up and engaged with them. Do we agree on everything? Most definitely not. Am I scared to walk around campus and to see these people? Not at all. I think the media really inflates issues which really aren't present. I'm a proud Israel supporter and feel no fear being so and walking around with my Israel and Hebrew necklaces on campus.
Just to sort of echo what Yael said, I completely agree. I've never once felt like any sort of fear of wearing shirts that say Israel or have Hebrew writing on them. I speak Hebrew in public, out loud, in front of people, like totally comfortable with being an advocate for Israel and being Jewish on UCLA's campus. I do think that there are a lot of things that get blown out of proportion when you have them shared over and over again on Facebook, and you have a lot of news outlets taking the story and covering the story over and over again. So something that might happen that is like a 30-second occurrence that affects 3 people and it gets blown over by the next day starts to get cycled over in the media over and over again for weeks or even months. And it just gives this image of a lot worse is happening. But yeah, I really don't think that I've ever felt uncomfortable. Like she said, the Jewish community at UCLA is part of the reason why I went to UCLA. A little story was when I went to Bruin Day, which is this day that UCLA puts on, which is like a big fair, and you get to sort of check it out at its best when you're an admit at UCLA as a senior in high school, expecting to come see it. So I showed up, and again, like I said, I was wearing my Israel is real shirt that day, and we walked past, me and my dad, this guy that was holding like a sign by himself in the corner that like, I think it said like Soda Stream with a line through it, and then it said like Jewish Voice for Peace. And so me and my dad went up to the sign, and my dad was just like, goes up to him and was like, oh, you can't hear? Oh, I'm so sorry.
Start over again.
The whole thing?
No, just so.
You went up to the sign and...
Okay, the sign, we're good there? Okay. So I went up to the sign, and wow, that's a lot louder. And my dad was like, are you actually Jewish, to this guy who said Jewish Voice for Peace? And the guy was like, yeah, yes, I am. And my dad, without even like trying to let him respond, said, okay, go live in Israel for 30 years, go serve in the army, and then you're allowed to have an opinion, and then grabbed me and walked away. And then Natalie Charney, who was the president of Hillel at the time, sees this and saw the shirt I was wearing and was like, oh my God, and ran after me and like stopped us and said, just so you know, that's not how the Jewish community looks at this campus at all. Come check out the Hillel booth. It's very different. And I came over to the booth, and then I got this neon yellow hat that says "Party with Jews" on it, and I just felt really comfortable and really at home with that table. And at that moment, I really realized, like, this is the campus I want to go to. So completely a great community, hundreds of people that I'm really good friends with to this day.
So I took a moment and I sent an article in advance that I think all of you have, which is what I would call my yes and answer, which is, yes, there are incidents that are totally unacceptable that happen on campus. And what Liav is saying about social media is true. We recycle them over and over and over again. So the lived experience, let's say even of a student like Rachel Beda, who a few years ago was asked by members of the student council at the time, of the UCLA Student Council, whether or not she could be a judge. Possibly she would be biased around Israel issues because she was Jewish, clearly anti-Semitic, made the front page of the New York Times, got her invited by President Obama to the White House. We read about that over and over and over again, but in the student's lived experience, that's something that happened once. 40 minutes later in the student's lived experience, it was resolved by somebody, by the faculty advisor. So you could point and say, you know what, that's actually coming out of a culture that's unhealthy, and I don't like that those students even thought for a second that they could ask that question. Or you could look at it from the other side and say, you know what, actually, that's an incident that played itself out over the course of 40 minutes. A responsible adult from the administration actually got involved. She was, in fact, appointed unanimously to the position. So it depends on what your perspective is on what you're seeing. What I usually say to parents about their kids' safety on campus is that there is no violence really whatsoever around Israel on campus. Maybe you've seen one recycled clip of something that happened in 2012 or something that happens over and over and over again. If you're worried about your kids' physical safety on campus, you need to have those kinds of open conversations that Dr. Zakai is saying that we need to have with our kids about all kinds of things, about sex, about drugs, about alcohol, and about stress. Those are the four things that are actually of physical danger to your kids while they are on campus. The worst thing that's going to happen to your kids on campus around Israel stuff is they might feel uncomfortable, right? And from a pedagogical standpoint, that may be something that you say to yourself, well, good, it's about time my kid felt uncomfortable, right, about something. Or you might say, I really don't want my kid to ever feel uncomfortable about these issues, and I'm going to try to insulate them, but that goes back to kind of what we were talking about for the first hour.
Sivan and Aaron, again, the media presents, or at least the Jewish media presents, a pretty dire picture. If not just in student experiences, but for example, faculty. A course being offered on the Berkeley campus, which is viciously anti-Israel. Kinds of rallies and other kinds of experiences on campuses across the country. Is the experience we've heard from these two students representative of what Jewish students across the country are experiencing, or is UCLA an aberration and it really is a lot worse, or is it a lot better? What's your experience about other campuses across the country?
I'm happy to take it. So towards the end of the year, if you're on social media, you may have seen that a prominent blog came out with the 40 worst campuses to be a Jewish student. And it read like a dream list of all of the campuses that every Jewish parent wants their kid to get into. NYU, Columbia was at the top of the list, Stanford, Harvard, Yale might have made the list, UCLA, Berkeley, right? Like all of these schools that we so want our kids to get into for two reasons. One, because they're great schools, and two, because many of them have really excellent, amazing Jewish student life on those campuses. It was a kind of a funny list to come out. So the lived experiences of lots of students around the country was then represented in the forward. So if you go to the forward and you Google that question, the 40 worst campuses, students, what they did is they allowed students from each one of those campuses to make a response. And by and large, the students responded and they said, you know what, I'm having a great time at this school as a Jew. Here's what happens in my daily life. Does it really upset me that there's some faculty here that say some things that are offensive and out of line? Yeah, it does. But if you look at today, for instance, UCLA, you'll see actually that there's a person who runs a very conservative course at UCLA who's complaining about the administration possibly having taken seats away from his course. So we live in a world right now where you're able to pay attention to the things that really bother you. And I think that, yeah, we should be bothered actually by some of the stuff that's happening in the faculty and some of the things that are happening in administrative. And I think that there's work to be done there. I don't want to sort of smooth everything over. In fact, I'm meeting with the administration tomorrow, which has been part of an ongoing series of meetings with administrators about the situation for Jewish students. We're going to talk about all of these, all of these issues. But because of the way that we're fed media right now, we have a tendency to pay attention to and recycle the things that may reflect an ugly corner of the university, but don't necessarily reflect a majority of the university. So, a lot of times we're giving, let's say the Students for Justice in Palestine, which has maybe 20 active members out of 30,000 undergraduates, attention that they don't actually deserve, right? And we're paying attention to an ugly corner of the university, and in our minds it becomes like, oh, there must be Nazis behind the Bruin Bear, and something really terrible is happening there, when in fact you've got 29,980 students who have elected not to be members of that organization, or you have 700 members of the faculty who have elected not to teach courses in the way that 2 really offensive members of the faculty teach.
Sivan, how do I prepare my kid to go to college so that my kid has this kind of an attitude of pride and confidence and strength, even though they're going to meet things which are going to be very difficult and very challenging?
So first I would say,
put the mic right up.
First I would say, as a corrective, I think that's the wrong question. I think the right question is, how do I prepare my children to lead meaningful Jewish lives, including on campus, including now, when they're before campus, including later? I think the hyper-focus on the campus as the problem doesn't help Jewish youth, doesn't help Jewish communities. And yet, with that corrective to the question, I would say the same way that we prepare them for everything else that's challenging in life. Rabbi Lerner gave us the 4 things that actually are dangerous for kids on campus: stress, sex, drugs, alcohol. We know that there is a way to start talking with children, 5-year-old children, about issues of sexual consent that are not about talking about sex, but that are helping kids from a very young age understand the values that we have about issues of respect for other people's bodies and respect for other people's personhood. I've heard wonderful, wonderful conversations that parents are having with children based on the movie Frozen, in which there are 2 main male characters, both of whom have a romantic relationship with Anna, the lead, one of whom asks for permission explicitly before he kisses her, and the other one of whom doesn't. It's not that hard to transition that into a meaningful, kid-friendly conversation about how we show respect for other people, if we're willing to assume that kids can handle it. The same thing goes for Israel. Having meaningful conversations with 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9-year-olds where we do not feed kids canned responses, where we do not say, this is why Israel matters to you, this is why being Jewish matters to you, this is what your Shabbat needs to be, this is why you need to X, Y, and Z. But to say things like, in the Jewish people's lived experience, here are the many roles that Israel has played. What's meaningful to you among those? Anytime we have a conversation with a youngster that honors that youngster's ability to be a smart and moral human being, we are preparing them for campus and for everything hard. And that is true about Israel, and that is true about all of the other 4 issues that Aaron say are the actual dangers on campus. And again, this goes back to we don't need to pad kids. We need to help them navigate. And part of what that means is starting from way younger than you think you need to, we need to be talking with kids about the things that actually matter, about what it means to lead a meaningful Jewish life, about what it means to respect other people, what it means to take care of your own body, what it means to take care of the planet, what it means to take care of American democracy. All of these things are things that youngsters can be engaged in.
I'd like to move now and ask you to do something which is difficult, which is to speak for your generation. Okay, and I apologize that you didn't expect that role and didn't prepare for it, but you're here, so I'm going to ask you. Several years ago, the journalist Peter Beinart wrote a very, very important piece about the attitudes of younger American Jews toward Israel. And he made 2 claims. One, he said, is younger American Jews are distanced from Israel, less loyal, less concerned, less involved in Israel's life than their parents and their grandparents. And point number 2 that he made, the reason for that, he said, the reason for that was that young American Jews tend to be politically liberal, and they see an Israel which doesn't reflect their values in the way that Israel treats Palestinians or Arabs, in the way that the way that women are treated in Israeli society. He gave a whole bunch of reasons. And he said, because of the difference between Israeli political life and American Jewish political attitudes, younger Jews are distancing themselves from Israel. So here's my 2 questions. First is, just as a general read of your friends, of your colleagues, your generation, are American Jews of your generation distanced from Israel? And is the reason because they object to what Israel does and how Israel behaves?
I think this is a great question, by the way. I talked about this with someone like 2 days ago. I think that there is like a sort of missing link with a lot of American Jews with Israel because, one, we don't live there. A lot of American Jews have never been there. And I think one of the sort of things that came out of my conversation a few days ago was that a lot of American Jews, sort of through camp and through their upbringing in Jewish schools and their synagogues, are given this like idealized image of Israel. This is Israel. You should love Israel wholeheartedly. And it's very much tied to their Jewish identity. And then you get sort of to a point, usually around when you go to college and you leave home and you're on your own, and suddenly you start seeing these things of criticizing Israel for X, Y, Z. And for someone who has nothing to fall back on, of an Israeli person who lives there and has family there, and they criticize Israel more than anybody here does, they do that because their entire experience is tied within Israel. So if I'm an Israeli person and I live there and I say the government is trash, I'm okay with that because I still know that I live there and I still know that my next day is going to be there and my next year is going to be there. But if I'm here and someone tells me that, then I'm suddenly going to feel, then how am I supposed to connect to Israel if I can't just love Israel? And I think that's something that then leads a lot of, you're talking about Jews get distanced from Israel, and you get this sort of, a bipolar, or not bipolar, but a polarized type of relationship. Either you're allowed to love Israel wholeheartedly and sort of brush under the rug any of the issues you might hear because it shatters that reality or that fantasy that you have of Israel. Or on the other hand, you embrace all of those criticisms, and because you have no reality in Israel to fall back on, you completely criticize Israel without having any sort of loving relationship with Israel. And I think that the biggest issue is that there's no actual relationship there. It's very much what I was told when I was growing up, or what I've heard on college campus, or what I heard from my rabbi, or at camp, or whatever. And I've noticed this trend of when American Jews either wholeheartedly love Israel or criticize Israel to the bone, that once they go to Israel and when they experience it for their own, not through birthright necessarily, but really go and see Israel and talk to the people and have their own life experience in Israel, make some friends in Israel, maybe have some family that lives in Israel, those things connect people to Israel in a way where they start feeling more comfortable in challenging their beliefs about Israel and feel more comfortable thinking critically about Israel. When I sit at Shabbat dinner with my family in Israel, the entire conversation for an hour and a half is my uncle yelling at my aunt and someone pounding the table and someone getting really upset about whatever's happening in Israel. But at the end of the day, we all sit down and we drink tea and we eat cookies, and that's it, because everybody there exists in Israel, and that's the reality. And I think that that's the biggest disconnect from American Jews in our generation and Israel.
So I agree 100% with what Liav says, but I might also take a different spin on it. Another question that pops into my mind is like being Jewish. I think that people who are Jewish are constantly assimilating into the overall society, and that's like another concern that we face as youth today. They want to go party, or they want to do XYZ, they have to study for class. So there's all these other concerns and like popular culture events going on, which students are distracted by. I think that's a factor that for Judaism and Israel, they have other things that are more appealing, like Israel's this faraway place, maybe once they've been there. So I definitely think it's crucial to raise your child with the constant discussion of Israel and introducing it to them. And then another thing that pops into my mind is like learning from our past. We're really lucky at UCLA to have something called Bearing Witness, where we meet with Holocaust survivors once a week, every Wednesday during winter quarter. It's a program that happens right now. And I guess, Baruch Hashem, that I haven't been exposed to like a Jewish Holocaust, but my parents, or people of my parents' generation, are children of Holocaust survivors. So there's a direct connection and correlation to the importance of the state of Israel. And I think that we're blessed in that we haven't had to directly experience the importance of a state of Israel, but that's also lost on us because we don't appreciate Israel for what it is. And for thousands of years, we're davening like Yerushalayim, like Eretz Yisrael, and like finally 69 years in this May, we'll have Israel, but like our generation is born knowing Israel, that it exists, but our parents, yes, to them too, but it's not a given for those who are over 70 or older. And I think that the fact that we're so blessed kind of puts us a step back also. Can
I say one more thing? I also want to say something in defense of this supposedly distanced generation. Because we know, again, from the sociological research on American Jewish youth, that yes, much of American Jewish youth is politically left-leaning in terms of their American politics. That is becoming less true, and it's not true. It's becoming increasingly less true with Orthodox Jews, but with non-Orthodox Jews, we are still predominantly politically liberal. But we also know two things that matter for this conversation. One is, at any other point in history, if you had taken a survey, and we can do this, we can go back and look at the surveys that have been asked year after year, and if you had looked at the under 35 folks and the older 35 folks, the older than 35 folks always look more connected to Israel than the young folks. Always. They looked less connected in 1967, they look less connected in 1948, they look less connected now. Second, which suggests that they might grow out of that. But even the growing out of that isn't that important, because today's American Jewish youth have been to Israel way, way more, and way earlier and way more frequently than their parents and grandparents. They actually are more likely to know Israelis. They are more likely to read Hebrew news sources. They are more likely to actually connect to Israeli culture, listen to Israeli music for fun of their own choosing. And none of these things suggest any kind of disconnection. They suggest a shift in the way that youth are connecting.
Right. So I would say that for the youth who are connected, that's definitely true. And probably what the majority of college Jews today have in common is that they're disconnected, right? So the only thing that the majority of Jewish students on campus right now at UCLA share is that they only have one Jewish parent in the house. And many of the Jewish parents, also one of them was Jewish. So they might have one Jewish grandparent, as it were. So you can say, I don't think that that's the death knell statistically of a child's upbringing. I'm sure that you all know many children who are being raised as Jews and identifying and engaging as Jews who have one Jewish parent. But it also means that for many of our students, they're not coming in connected. They're not coming in with any knowledge of Judaism or Israel, or any compelling reason to engage. So when Liav was talking about their engagement coming from a place of love, right? These two students happen to have been raised in houses where they were given that, right? You've got, when I look at my Hillel leadership, and I ask my student board to raise their hand and tell us, of the 10 of you, how many of you have two Jewish parents? 9 of them raise their hands. But statistically, only 3 or 4 of them should raise their hands, right? So we have this emergent leadership that's coming out of a very highly connected and well-educated group of students who are getting day school, getting trips to Israel, getting resources like they've never received before. But there's really no compelling reason that the other 70% of the students on campus should care about Jewish life or Israel at all, because they were never exposed to either one of them. And if they were exposed to them, it stopped at 13. So they came through some kind of bar mitzvah factory, which their parents probably decided, oh God, my kid's 10, right? I got to sign him up for courses. And then when they were 13, they dropped back off the Jewish map. So they still think about those issues. If they had Israel education or they had Jewish education, they still think about those issues as adolescents. Whereas everything else in their life has progressed for the last 5 years. So they think about chemistry and sex and mathematics and all kinds of other things as 18-year-olds, but they still think about Jewish issues and Israel as 13-year-olds. And that's a big gap to fill when they come to campus.
You both come from families of Israeli parents. So let me just ask you a quick question.
My parents aren't Israeli. I'm a wannabe Israeli. No worries.
You're a wannabe Israeli. Your parents are Israeli. Do Israeli-American kids hang together? Is that an identity, so that American, Israeli, you have like a bunch of buddies that you hang together who are Israeli-American kids?
Yeah, actually, so I was in the Tzofim, the Israeli Scouts in San Diego. I was part of the group of kids that helped found that chapter. I tell my youngest brothers, like group of kids, like I tell them stories of back in the day. So I feel very proud of that. My best friends in high school, 1,000% came from the Israeli Scouts, and like my best friends at UCLA are ones that are Israeli, and we connect in a different way because there's just so much more to connect under. We speak Hebrew. We have certain rituals that we do at home or traditions that we're all very connected with. And if I'm being honest, a lot of American Jews I struggle to connect with sometimes because it's a different. While they're struggling to find who they are Jewishly, a lot of Israeli Jews, it's sort of innate in the way that you connect with your Judaism because like Israelis are living there, and it's so Judaism is always just there. It's not something you have to question. It's not something you have to challenge yourself with. And so coming to UCLA, actually, that was a kind of a shock factor for me, was like meeting a lot of Jews who aren't Israeli and who do have these types of questions with themselves. And so, yeah, totally. I have always sort of connected with Israeli community.
Yeah, El, you're a day school kid.
Yes, totally.
Yeah? Do you hang with other day school kids? Is that an identity? Or are highly identified Jews like yourself, do they sort of hang with each other? Or do you sort of like run away from that and go want to hang with people that like mamish went any place but a day school?
So I guess the reason I am very honored that Rabbi Aaron thought I was Israeli because I speak Hebrew. Like everyone thinks I'm Israeli, and it's like the best compliment someone can tell me. So I call myself the wannabe Israeli. I'm that person who runs and listens to Israeli music like every single day. I have it on my Spotify, etc. So I definitely identify with Israelis too. That being said, my 3 best friends on campus, One is not Jewish, one's an Orthodox Jew, and the third one just found herself and went on Hillel UCLA Birthright and is in love with Israel just this past winter. So my roommates happen not to be Jewish, none of them, and I have 4. I prefer it that way. I think, I don't know why, I can't really explain it, but I think maybe diversity is just the best. Like, I flourish from diversity, and I think that I spend tons of time at Hillel and tons of time with Israelis, and I think just putting myself out there, and college is that time to explore, meet different people. My roommate actually is a devout Christian, and it's literally, I think 2 nights ago, we were looking at the 10 Commandments together. And like, that is an experience that I wouldn't have if I lived with a Jew, but she goes to church. I mean, we were looking at the Bible, so, but she goes to church every Sunday, and I go to Shabbat every Friday, and we highly, deeply, deeply respect each other for that. And we are there for each other and discuss different holidays. And it's been an amazing experience living with her, and I've learned so much, and so has she, and we've greatly benefited from each other's presence.
Thank you. One of the interesting initiatives that's happened in the last decade is Birthright. And I'm just interested in your responses to what Birthright has done to the identity of kids, right? Whether it has succeeded in drawing kids closer to their Jewishness, to a connection with Israel, or whether it's just a passing kind of thing and it doesn't really have a hold on people's identity. Aaron, what's your experience?
Yeah, sure. So I'll go back to actually a phrase that Dr. Zakai used earlier today, which was about having a meaningful Jewish life. Right, so the best studies, the most robust studies about raising Jewish kids or convincing kids during college that Judaism or Israel is something that they want to incorporate into their life, is having them have multiple positive experiences around both Judaism and Israel. So the students who, like Jim Joseph did a study about 10 years ago, longitudinal, the students who have 4 to 6 really meaningful Jewish experiences during college outrank their peers incredibly in their Jewish metrics after they graduate. So stuff like whether or not they light Shabbat candles, they marry somebody who's Jewish, they join a philanthropic Jewish board, they continue to be engaged in Israeli culture and listen to music. All of those things, for people who had multiple Jewish experiences, very, very powerful. For people who have only 1 or 2 meaningful Jewish experiences, not as good. So it's great if Birthright is providing for us an entry point into and a beginning of meaningful Jewish experiences. And there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of students who have gone on the Birthright experience. And in general, I endorse it. I think it's great. But I think that we have to look at it as the door into which you are now entering into your Jewish future. Because if you don't continue to have Jewish experiences, hang out with other Jews, do Jewish learning, see Jewish ethics or other things as parts of your life, it's not sustainable.
You have friends who went on Birthright?
I do.
Did it change them?
I think so. I mean, a lot of people that I know that have gone on Birthright come back with this. I went on Birthright 2.5 years ago, and everyone that comes back sort of connected in some way. A majority of the people on the trip, I would say, have some type of spark, like he's saying, that they want to continue to explore their connection with Israel, to explore who they are Jewishly that they didn't have before. But it is true that those people need to have access to continuing those things, otherwise that spark dies out pretty quickly.
Good. Yeah. Sivan, yeah? Yeah.
So one of the amazing things that Birthright has given the Jewish community is one of the biggest research agendas that the Jewish community has ever seen, and they meticulously track every Birthright participant, but more importantly, they meticulously track everyone who applied to and did not go on Birthright. And so they're able to see what happened to the people who applied and did not go, and what happened to the people who applied and did go. To me, the most compelling thing that I have learned from this research, which mostly comes out of Brandeis University, is what it does for children who have either one Jewish parent or who are patrilineally Jewish and whose previous Jewish experiences have been as kind of outsiders. And it is for those Jewish participants that we see the biggest lasting long-term By long-term right now, I think it's about 10 years, because that's about as far as we can track with this. Long-term impact on their continuation as Jews and their self-identification as Jews. So now we don't know if it's birthright that did that, or if it's birthright's expansive definition of who counts as a Jew that did that. But we do know that for kids who went on birthright, who had minimal Jewish education, minimal Jewish upbringing, those folks seem to have a lasting, at least self-identification bump from birthright.
I have 100 more questions. You want me to keep asking them, or do you want to ask some questions? I think they want to ask them. So, Louise, are you here? Billy's here. Billy's got the microphone. He's bigger than most of us, so be nice to him. You got it? Douglas can shout if he can't use the mic. Just push the button. Hold the button down. Just keep pushing it, and it'll come on, I promise you. Have faith, my son.
Thank you.
There
Thank
you go, see? The Lord God provides.
I have 2 Berkeley students, both of whom are Romanics, and I was scared of the same things that you were asking these students. A couple of years into the experience, I asked my daughter and her roommate when I took them out to dinner about their own experiences. What they said was what they'd encountered in their daily lives was comparable to what you guys are encountering. It just wasn't a factor. But what they did say was what pushed at the fabric of Jewish unity at Berkeley was J Street, both of these girls found it annoying. Now, I tried to keep a poker face, but inside I was going, yes! And I just want to know, do they push at the fabric of Jewish unity at UCLA? Are they within Hillel, or are they, something else?
I wonder if I could expand the question. Would that be okay? Not just J Street, but all sorts of outside Israel and Jewish organizations. Do you feel pressure from those organizations, and are they helpful or not?
I'm going to take this one. Last year and this year, there were posters put up all around our campus by David Horowitz, and basically making claims about our chancellor or our vice chancellor Kang, saying that they're racist and calling out names from SJP. And then last year, my freshman year, there were posters putting up saying SJP is Jew killers. And then when outside organizations come in and post these posters, at first, SJP and other orgs assume it's us, like the Jews on campus at UCLA. And these are clearly not our perspectives and thoughts. And we were the first ones out there to take them down. So it's really tough as a student who is active politically at UCLA in the Jewish arena to not only have to deal with those students at UCLA who disagree with me politically, but also have to take care of the Jewish community outside of UCLA who's representing me and not and doing things that I disagree with also. And we do have a J Street at UCLA. I'm friends with both people who are on J Street. I disagree with them politically. Personally, I lean to the right in Israeli politics, then we are able to have those discussions. But we respect each other as people, we're friends, and luckily there is a J Street, and how would you say it's part of Hillel? I'm not sure how to answer.
It's a student organization.
It's a student organization. There's lots of, just like Bruins for Israel's under Hillel, J Street is too. We're all student organizations.
But neither of them really are. I mean, that's the... UCLA Hillel is unique in that we use the building to meet as Bruins for Israel, and J Street has had events there, but they're a very small organization in comparison. But I'm friends with those people, and I don't find that they make it an issue for us politically or amongst the Jewish community. And we do have students supporting Israel also, and we're able to communicate and be united on countering Apartheid Week through SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine. So I started keeping a list a few years ago because I couldn't keep track of all of the different Israel orgs that claimed to be involved in Israel on campus. So I asked my shaliach at the time, like, can you just tell me, like, what is this CCI and who's COCR, JBM? And so we made a list, and our first list had 37 different organizations, different Jewish organizations that were like the pots that you brought in before, right? Each one with its highly specialized perspective, each one raising money. Now, the list, every time that I see a new group come and say something about Israel on campus, I add it to the list. So my list now has 109 different Jewish organizations on it that claim to be involved in Israel on campus in some way or another. I think that, and when you compare that, like if that was an army, right, and that army was fighting one unified army, i.e. the Students for Justice in Palestine, you would think that from a strategic standpoint, it might be helpful to, do some uniting around those issues. But if you've ever seen The Life of Brian, when Brian comes over, right, and he wants to join in the fight against the Romans, he asks the guys, are you the Judean People's Front? And they say, we're the People's Front for Judea, right? and then they say that the only group that they hate more than the Romans, right, is the Judean People's Front. So Jews are amazing at this sort of proliferation of what I would call, Freud called it, the narcissism of small differences. And we have to get over that, or we're gonna lose. We're better resourced. We have more students. We have hundreds and hundreds of pro-Israel students at UCLA who have thousands of allies. Like a couple of years ago, when there was a BDS resolution, they brought a petition to that council and they said, "We have more signatures on our petition than any of you were elected by on this council. You do not speak for the student body of UCLA. They're powerful." But this idea that we're going to be fractured around the things that we disagree about is destructive for our advocacy, and it's destructive for our community.
If I can also answer a little bit, I think it's true. I think there's a lot of, just a bunch of organizations, and it's very nitpicky differences. And I think something that we've been trying to do this year as Bruins for Israel is sort of change that a little bit, and because people would always say, oh, I can only identify with SSI, Students Supporting Israel. Oh, I can only identify with Bruins for Israel. Oh, I can only identify with J Street. And to answer the J Street thing really quick, my roommate is on the board of J Street. We disagree on a lot of things, but like we're very, very, very close friends, and it's not at all something that challenges the community. If anything, it just provides another outlet of opinions, and it's really, it's not anything like some of the things I've heard from other campuses. It's very integrated, I think, into the community, and I think that something that we've been trying as Bruins for Israel to do is sort of just kind of create an umbrella for all of these organizations that we can just say, like, listen, we're Bruins for Israel. We're not Bruins for Israel if you come from this perspective. We want everybody to sort of feel comfortable coming together and having open dialogues about things that they want to talk about, and not feeling like, oh, they're from that organization, I can't talk to them. Because if we can't talk amongst ourselves, then how are we going to talk to anybody else, and how are we going to show any sort of united front?
Thank you. Who has the mic? Good. Sean.
Young people are born at a time when Israel already exists. My recommendation is that to realize the connection with Israel, teach the children about Alfred Dreyfus, because it had the effect on me, and also tell them to imagine what happens if there is no Israel. Imagine that.
Let me ask this question to Sivan. Teaching history to this generation, is it possible? Is it helpful? How does one do that?
Yes, it is possible. Yes, it is helpful. One of the questions, though, that is often asked on the studies is, if Israel were not to exist tomorrow, would you consider it a personal tragedy? And there is a split. Older folks say, yes, I would consider it a personal tragedy. And younger folks say, But in terms of the question about history, one of the amazing things that's happening now is we actually we're kind of in a renaissance of history and civics education in America. There's amazing resources that are being put out all the time. National History Education Clearinghouse, the Library of Congress Teaching with Primary Sources program. History education is in right now, right? We often go in dips and waves, right? During the Cold War, science education was really in. Right now, people are understanding that history education is important, and that's not in the Jewish world. That's in the general world. History and civics matter. And that means that we as a Jewish community have an opportunity to kind of ride on the coattails of this larger enthusiasm for teaching history. Teaching history also might mean something a little bit different than it used to, because we now see good history education as a process of involving students in themselves doing the work that historians do. That is to say, reading primary sources, analyzing information, putting it together to construct a historical narrative, consulting multiple sources from multiple authors to kind of create an understanding of the past. And that's a little bit different than here is the narrative of the Jewish people. And so one thing that it does is it lends itself to kids who go through good history education programs being able to be really savvy, really good critical thinkers, which helps them not only understand the past, but also do things like exist in the political climate in which there are alternative facts, and to understand how it is that we actually source information and find out what is real and credible. But it also means that there isn't anymore only one Jewish narrative of the Jewish past.
Erin, I want to support Bruins for Israel. I want to help these kids do the work. I can't get onto the UCLA campus because I don't know where to park. I can't even get to Hillel because I don't know where to park. Yeah, I tried that once, and the door kept slamming on my. What can I do to support Bruins for Israel? What can we do to support these kids?
Well, so very Tachlis oriented. They're actually in a fundraising campaign right now. So you could log on to ononefoot.org.
Ononefoot.org?
I think so.
Is that
And
what
look
it's
at
called?
yeah, is that right? Yeah, right. And so Bruins for Israel actually raises money to do stuff like send these non-Jewish students to Israel. So UCLA didn't pay for that trip. Hillel paid for that trip, right? Or the student professor dinner. Or tomorrow night they're having a gala with 175 other students, including members of Congress and Chevre Knesset, with non-Jews about the Israel-American alliance, right? So they do incredible, incredible stuff. And they've actually stepped up now to begin their own fundraising campaign to support that. I think there's more knowledge now and education that we need to do with young people. One of the things that Birthright and free Shabbat dinners have done for the generation that is coming out of college now is we've said we want to make your experiences free, and that was the right thing to do. Hillel has gone from Shabbat dinners of 60 people to Shabbat dinners of 220 people, right, which is amazing. And it also is the difference between spending $600 and $2,200 on Shabbat dinners. So we're working on two things. One is we're working on resourcing to make that continue to be a free experience. But the second thing that we're doing with our young people is we're talking to them about where this money actually comes from, and hopefully creating in them the desire to be philanthropically motivated into the future.
So if I want to support Bruins for Israel, I go on onefoot.com.
Ononefoot.org.
.org. Ononefoot.org, right. Yeah, there's probably some porn site. And if I want to support Hillel, what would that be?
If you want to support Hillel, come to UCLAHillel.org.
Hillel, UCLAHillel.org. .org.
Yes.
Okay. And if I want to sponsor a Shabbat dinner for the 200 people that are poor, starving students from Dykstra Hall, where would I
just put it in the memo.
Put it in the memo.
Just put it in the memo.
And I can sponsor a Shabbos dinner in honor of my Hebrew school teacher, you know, who I remember with fondness.
I
Is
love
that right?
I love that.
In memory of someone, in honor of someone.
Absolutely.
It's $2,200 to sponsor Shabbos
I feel like
dinner.
we're at a gala dinner and we're.
I'm trying to help you. Shmuck.
Yes, thank
Let's
you
say
so much.
Yes. right?
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank our guests. Thanks so much for coming tonight. And thank you to Louise and to Billy and to Alana Zimmerman for making this series possible, for the Schulweis Institute, and to Lil and Jess Bine. Thank you very much.